Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Once again, I and many other Muslim spokesmen find ourselves having to respond to yet another horrific outrage perpetrated by people who call themselves Muslims. Firstly, I must state unequivocally, as I have on every previous occasion, that these atrocities are as much crimes under Islamic law as they are in the eyes of any other legal system, and punishable by the severest penalties. So nothing I am going to say can be taken to condone in any way the actions of these fanatical criminals. However, I do think it necessary on this occasion to speak very plainly about what has happened and not to allow the understandable emotional impact of this act of terror and the terrible distress caused to so many by this senseless, unjustified killing of so many innocent people to prevent us from looking clearly at the underlying causes that brought this about. Responsibility for this criminal atrocity has been claimed by IS. It may well be that they instigated what happened. They may even have recruited, trained, and armed the perpetrators. But the real roots of this Parisian massacre go much deeper and far further back in time than the short period IS have been in existence. This awful event and several others in recent history took place in France. At least 7 million French citizens, that is more than 10% of the whole population of France, are from a North or West African or Levantine background. The vast majority of these people are Muslims. The history of the French colonial presence in the countries from which they originated was certainly not a happy one, and in the case of Algeria, frankly appalling. And the conditions in which nearly all of them live in present-day France can only be described as abominable. This has been all too distressingly illustrated in many documentaries about the banlieue, the inner suburban high-rise estates where most French Muslims live. And many of us will have seen the graphically explicit feature films that have unveiled the poverty and violence endemic in these communities. To this must be added the openly expressed hostility towards Islam of much of the remainder of the French population. For all these reasons, it is scarcely surprising that there is a real feeling of deep resentment on the part of a huge number of these extremely disadvantaged French citizens. The simmering, passive resentment of these millions has led to the actual openly expressed anger of thousands among them. And this, in turn, has made it a simple matter for organizations such as IS to exploit the psychotic rage of a tiny minority at the summit of this mountain of discontent, and persuade them into carrying out their ghastly, nihilistic, murderous atrocities. Again, I repeat, I am not saying these circumstances in any way condone the crimes that have been committed. They are not condonable. But it is vital to state clearly that the resentment felt by this significant portion of the French population is completely understandable. In quite a number of situations, the Muslims of France are prevented by law from expressing their identity as Muslims. For instance, under the banner of secularism, laws have been passed prohibiting girls in secondary education from wearing headscarves. The same applies to a lot of Muslim women in many other types of employment. And the public display of Muslim identity in France is officially inhibited in several other ways. This has led to many French Muslims feeling as though they are persona non grata, unwelcome in their own country, a feeling exacerbated by the general climate of hostility towards them that they are continually confronted with in the media and in their daily lives. For this reason, many of them are not at all at ease in their place where they live, and, in a lot of cases, very insecure in their own identity. This makes the vulnerable among them easy prey for those out to radicalize them and brainwash them into adopting their false nihilistic doctrines. Although in the context of this latest outrage, I have necessarily singled out France for these criticisms, the same can be said to a greater or lesser extent of virtually every other country in Europe, in all of which there are now significant Muslim populations facing very similar problems. Perhaps the main reason for this is the fact that Islam is almost universally viewed by non-Muslim Europeans as an interloper, as something that does not really belong in Europe, something that really belongs somewhere else. This deep-seated prejudice is historically inaccurate, demonstrates great ignorance on the part of Europeans about the nature of Islam, and is now in real terms completely nonsensical in the light of the existing situation. Most of the so-called Muslim immigrants are in fact no longer immigrants at all. A great many of them are in their third generation and an increasing number in their fourth. So they are now completely European and more often have absolutely no contact whatsoever with the countries from which their grandparents and great-grandparents came. What this means is that Islam is now, in reality, a fully integrated European religion, ineradicably here to stay. It is, to use a French term, a fait accompli. It is vital that the governments of Europe really understand this. They invited Muslims to come here in great numbers. It is now time for them to live up to the implications of that invitation. Islam is what it is, and most of those who did the inviting knew from their colonial experience exactly what that entails. Islam is not like Christianity with its principle of giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Islam embraces every aspect of a Muslim's life. It cannot be reformed or secularized in the way that Christianity has been. It cannot be turned into the neutered religion that our non-Muslim rulers are trying to make it. Room must be created within European polities for Islam to express itself in a way that is truly fulfilling to the European Muslims themselves. It goes without saying that Muslims must live within the restraints of the legal systems of those countries where they live. But those systems, which are in any case in a state of constant development, must adapt themselves to accommodate the legitimate religious and social needs of the millions of Muslim citizens living under their aegis. European Muslims must be made to feel at home in the lands that are their home. If this does not happen, the dreadful cycle of repression followed by mindless violence we have all been witnessing for the last decade or more will continue into the foreseeable future. And it will not happen so long as governments insist on taking advice about Islam from time-serving Muslims who do not represent the great bulk of the Muslim community. there has to be a real process of consultation and implementation involving Muslims who really do represent the orthodox, mainstream views of Islam. When that does happen, the Muslims of Europe will happily find their proper place in the lands where they live. They will greatly enrich their countries materially, culturally, and spiritually. The social justice, probity, compassion, and charity that have always been the hallmark of properly functioning Muslim societies will characterize their communities. And these terrible atrocities, along with their evil instigators and perpetrators, will be correctly consigned to the dustbin of history where they truly belong.